Today on TandTeaching.
If I'm thinking about a school leader, I'm thinking about know yourself. I would say know yourself, know the context, know the theory. Everything is about people. You can do nothing without people. I don't care if they say you computerize it, you can do something. It's people that have designed that, people who've made it happen. People are everything, and they form your culture first. So you need a culture, you need people. I think with mistakes, it's really simple. I listened to a Radio 4 interview once, and this guy was a boss for like this big company. There's a Friday boss it used to be. And you know what it was? The guy said, have you made mistakes? He said, I make mistakes all the time. And he said, what's the difference? He said, I correct them quickly.
Welcome to TandTeaching, the educational podcast you can listen to with a cup of tea. I'm Arthur Moore, and with me, as always, it's Mike Harrowell. Hi, Mike.
Hello, Arthur. How are you?
I'm really well today, buddy. How are you?
Yeah, really well. Looking forward to this conversation.
Well, you probably want to know who we're talking to then, right?
It helps, yeah.
It does help. So today, Mike, we are talking to Peter Hughes. He's the CEO of the Mossbourne Federation of Schools, and he's written a book all about outstanding school leadership. We're going to talk about the importance of knowing yourself as a leader, and then we're going to talk about some leadership systems that you can implement in your organization. Mike, this is a brilliant conversation with so many takeaways. So listeners, go away, put the cup of tea on, get a biscuit, settle down, and listen to Peter Hughes talking about outstanding school leadership. Welcome back to TandTeaching. We are lucky enough to be joined today by Peter Hughes. Peter, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Oh, so do you want to give us the quick Peter Hughes story, kind of how you got into education and how you came to being the CEO of the Mossbourne Federation?
Well, education was a bit of luck, actually. I think there's a good story about that. When essentially my friends filled out my university application form. As a joke, a bit like going to secondary school in Australia, you fill out your 6 universities. My friends actually put down teaching, and I was lucky enough to be accepted. And so I went to teaching. I've got a degree in maths teaching. Not many people have a degree in maths teaching. I don't think many people sort of think coming out of school, what I want to do is be a maths teacher. And did that for a few years in Australia, worked in the outback first. So my first school was in a place called Burke, 1,000 kilometres west of Sydney. If you get that idea for here, you'd probably be somewhere around about Italy. In Australia, you haven't even left the state yet, to give you a sense of size. Then I went back to my hometown, taught alongside for 3 years the teachers that taught me. That was rather interesting, especially when you're telling off a child. And that teacher just says, I remember one time this teacher leaned in and went, oh, I know that you would have done exactly that same thing while I'm trying to tell a child off, right? And you're just thinking, and I thought you were strict. You're clearly quite funny. And then I sort of did the usual Australian thing and jumped on a plane, came over here to do a year's traveling. And well, lo and behold, I didn't end up at Earl's Court, but I did end up loving the United Kingdom. And yeah, sort of not long after I'd been here, joined the Future Leaders Program. And I was lucky enough to be appointed to Mossbourne under the Sir Michael Wilshaw, for those who sort of might remember the previous head of Ofsted. And yeah, from that, became the sort of head of Mossbourne, and then came on to be the head of the Mossbourne Federation of Schools. So bit of a whirlwind tour of my sort of career there.
Yeah, and you've now written a book all about outstanding school leadership, kind of based on your kind of experiences and kind of expertise there. So I think we should jump in with the big question, which is obviously, what makes an outstanding school leader, Peter? Please solve that problem instantly. I
was going to say, when I know, I'll tell you. But given I've written a book about it, I'll have to actually come up with what I've said. So I think for me, it's I think about it in sort of two ways, right? So the first one is, if I'm thinking about a school leader, I'm thinking about know yourself. I would say know yourself, know the context, know the theory. What do I mean by that? So knowing yourself. So what's your why? If you've ever listened to Simon Sinek's the classic, isn't it? When he talks about like that apple and he talks about why. So I was a leader, like if you don't know why you're doing it, how can somebody else follow you, right? You're asking people to buy into what you see that they can't see yet. Imagine you're in a turnaround school and you're trying to ask somebody to do something they can't see. So you need to be able to sell that vision. You need to know precisely why you're doing it. Otherwise, it's really hard for other people to see. We've all seen those leaders that they seem a bit confused and not quite sure where they're going. I don't want to say Boris Johnson or something like that because he's sort of going to trip over, but it's that idea, isn't it? Like, do you know where you're going and you're clear about it? And because then you can bring other people along for that journey. If you don't know, you can't expect somebody else. And I'm not talking about, we're going to get great results or great A-level results or anything, that sort of stuff. Like, why are you there? Like, for me, I'm there because I want to create environments where learning is the norm. I want to improve children's life chances by creating environments where learning is done. I want learning to be at the heart of everything that we do in my school. And that's it. So everything is about that. And other things are sort of byproducts of that. Then I think about like your context. Like when I'm out in Burke in Australia, 1,000 kilometers west of Sydney, that's one context. I've got a different group of children. I've got families. What are they doing? And then I go to like, I'm in central London, right, in Hackney. And we're going to, surrounded by council estates. That's a completely different demographic, a completely different context. And so knowing those families, how they might respond to something, how they deal with it, how they culturally work, it's a really important thing to know. That doesn't mean I'm going to change my maths lessons, right? Maths in Australia, in Burke, in Sydney, London, it's all the same. Maths doesn't change, right? And it hasn't changed in 20 years of teaching. It's nearly the same. I've got a whiteboard where I put it on there now. I prefer a bit of chalk still, but ultimately nothing's really changed. If I could get a chalkboard in my school, I'd be a happy camper. But the kind of idea is that the people are slightly different and you need to understand that nuances of how people work, right? We're talking a little bit about different accents and who people are, and that'll mean different cultures there. And what I say to one family and how we sort of explain that might be different to how I explain it to a different family. They all love their children. They all want the best for their children. I thoroughly believe I've never met a mum or dad who doesn't care about their child and want them to do well. That might be slightly different to what good is. I want a good plumber as much as I want a good doctor, right? And I probably want a better plumber most of the time. So it doesn't mean go to university or they have these aspirations. It just means they care about their child. They want the best. They want them to grow up to be a good young man, young woman, or in today's age, young X, if we want to do that. That's what they want for their child. And know the theory is a kind of an interesting one to put onto that, because you think if you know yourself and know the context. But what theory does, and I'm not a big reader, I really struggled to read. My mum couldn't read. It was kind of something I had to learn really and struggle with still. I'm a mathematician. I thought reading wasn't my thing. But what it did, when you read the theory, it gives you a language and a framework with which to think. So if I want to talk about something or I want to explain something to somebody else, if I haven't got a language to explain or I haven't got a word, then how do I explain it to somebody? How do I show them what I'm thinking? And we all know that, like that cognitive overload when you're teaching kids. If they haven't got, you're a mathematician, right? So if a child can't do multiplication, how are they going to add fractions, right? Because they can't do it. So there's cognitive overload and they've got no mechanism for which to do it. If I'm talking about school culture and I say something like sweat the small stuff, well, what does that look like? So I need a mechanism for which to look at school culture and explain it. So I need a language with which to do that. And that's what it does. And we're talking about the theory gives you the words, the language, the frameworks. They're never perfect, but it gives you that to work on. And so quite often you see leaders say, oh, we've all read the same book, where there's something maybe the founder's mentality. So they're all talking the same language and they're all visualizing the same thing. So I always think about it, know yourself, know your context, and know your theory. If you can marry those three things perfectly together, you might one day be an outstanding leader. And I'm still working on it.
I think those 3 points you could almost say, like, even like as a classroom teacher, you need to know yourself, you need to know your theory, you need to know the context. So I think they're really good questions to kind of ask yourself. If we kind of then use that as a kind of a question for then actually kind of implementing stuff in school. So you're a school leader, you think you know yourself, you think you know your context, you think you know the theory. How then do you go about building a school around those ideas and around the school you want to build?
Yes, I'm gonna sort of park that for a moment and just think that I think about when I'm building a school, I think about three other things that go with these three things. So I'm thinking about people, right? Nothing happens without people. We're in a people business. Whether you are or not in the people business, you may not be a teacher you're listening. Everything is about people. You can do nothing without people. I don't care if they say you computerize it, you can do something. It's people that have designed that, people who've made it happen. People are everything. And they form your culture first. So you need a culture, you need people. So I spoke about culture before, but for me, culture is something really simple. It's every conversation that happens. It's every interaction that happens in your school. That's all culture is. It's not sweat the small stuff, as I said. It's not these slogans that people might have. We're inclusive. No, it's every conversation that happens. And every time a conversation happens, your culture is being defined by that conversation. or by that interaction, or that silence, right? All of those count, or not questioning that. So when I first think about implementing something in the school, who are the people I'm working with? So I know myself, but my context is this group of people, right? And what's the theory telling me about it? Then I think about what data or what information do I want these people to have? And then I can think about what systems or processes we want to put under that. So when I'm thinking about, say I want to make a change in a school, I made a change to move away from lesson observations to kind of having this drop-in thing. So knowing myself was being really clear about, do I believe this? Does this fit into this? Do I actually believe this is right? Do I think this will improve the quality of teaching? Do I believe this will fit into what I believe is what I want for my school? And that's the first thing, because if you don't believe that, why are you doing it? I don't care who told you in central government, ignore them, right? Because if it doesn't do something for children, don't do it. So first thing is, if I'm going to implement this, I'm going to implement a new, I don't know, so observation system. And my first question is exactly that. Will that change have a positive impact on children? If you think it will, then you've got the first layer of that done, right? It's fitting into your why. Okay, will it work in my context? Where are my teachers on this journey? Where are they now? How do I give them from where they are to where they need to be? And when I'm thinking about moving those teachers up and again helping them understand it, I can then think about what's the culture of my school? Does this fit into the culture of my school? How does that come together? And then lastly, what does the theory of change tell me about change? And then I can sort of think about, okay, people are going to be excited at the beginning. I'm going to need some people who are going to be on board with it. Then they're going to get annoyed at it because it's not going to be as good as they thought it was. And then you're going to go through the sort of valley of death. And then eventually you're going to get a few more people on that. And then they're going to come up the other side. So as we think about implementing that change, I'm thinking about, first, do I believe in it? I can't sell you something I don't believe in, right? That's just like a waste of my time. Then does it fit my context? Is it going to work for us? Or do I have to do more work on that around my culture? And then who are my senior leaders that are going to do that or help me on that journey? But then when I'm sort of thinking, right, so then you've implemented it, or you've sort of started implementing it, or you think you've implemented it, because the number of times people have implemented something, I'm doing inverted air quote marks there, and you come back a week later and you're like, but it's not happening. And they, oh, I implemented it. Like, but did you go back? Did you check? Did you go back over and over and over? I could see you smiling, going, oh yeah, I know that. How many times has a leader's done something, only for 6 months later you go like, oh, what's going on there? I was in a school the other day and somebody had said they'd implemented whiteboards. And so they took me around the school and said, oh yeah, we're using mini whiteboards everywhere. Now, don't get me started, I'm not a fan, but that's a separate question.
Just going to point out, I think mini whiteboards are the greatest invention of all time, but please continue, Peter, please continue.
No, I was going to say, I knew that was going to be controversial. I feel like, anyway, I feel like I want to get struck on the mini whiteboards, but I'm going to try and stay focused because I find staying focused really hard. It's meant to be a skill of a leader to stay focused. I literally find it the hardest thing in the world. So we'll park the mini whiteboard, but I went around the school, so we'll both agree on this. And he said, yeah, we're going to see all the mini whiteboards. I went, I saw 2, and we've just spent 2 hours walking around your school and looking at lessons. I saw 2 kids actually using them. And he was telling me about how they've been implemented. I got back to there, and we didn't have a conversation about it. I thought, but the one thing we were talking about was the mini whiteboard. So when I talk about the data or the information, I'm talking about after you've done something, is somebody going to go around and check it's happening? And when it is happening, say to people, look, I'm really good, that's great, I'm loving it. And where it's not, be honest with the person, nudge forward and say, look, this is the expectation. And so you've got that clarity and that continual follow-up on that data, right? And then when we think about that, that gives you that information to make informed decisions as a senior leader. And the teacher's got the information in order to act, oh, this is what the leaders want me to do. And they've come back to it. So it must actually be important to them. You know, I was a teacher, right? If it didn't happen, if I wasn't told at least twice, I didn't do it, right? This one will disappear, right? This one will disappear. So we'll just wait for the next wave of something else to come along. Yeah, 2, at least 3 times before I'm going to change anything I'm doing. And then they might mean business, right? Then I'll worry about it then. And then underneath that is, how do you build a system that makes that really easy? So it's easy for the teachers to access that mini whiteboard. It's easy for the kids to have it available. There's no cognitive overload for the teachers. There's no cognitive overload for the person who's going to go around and check on that. How do you build those routines and rituals into what you're doing in order for those mini whiteboards in this case, or as I said, around the quality of teaching and the system? How do you build that into your day-to-day to minimize that cognitive load and push it forward? Can I just say, when you think about cognitive load, do you remember how hard it was during COVID? Like, my brain was just full. And it was full because it was different every day. And that's what overload was, right? It was this idea that it wasn't the same, having to rethink everything. Whereas if you get really good systems in place, then you reduce people's cognitive load. And when you reduce teachers' cognitive load or leaders' cognitive load, they've got more space to be brilliant. And our job as like leaders is to give people the space to be brilliant. And you do that by freeing up the load, by creating great systems that do that. I hope that was clear. It was a one more round. Go.
No, I love that last point, Peter, about the systems, and something I've seen in my career when leaving a school, and then you kind of check back in on that school, the people you work with 6 months later, and you're like, what do you mean? Like, all the stuff I implemented is not there anymore. And you suddenly realize that you were the system, that you hadn't created a system that could outlast you, that you were just driving it, and actually taking you away meant that the system didn't last, which is something I've tried to do since, is, always thinking when I'm introducing something, will it last beyond me? Is this going to be really embedded in what we do as a school?
Oh, you're singing to my heart, right? It's a really hard thing to do, because we think something's happening, but because we're driving it, we can be very blinkered to it and blinkered to what's going on. It's working. Look, I can see it. But how do you know it's embedded? I think, and is it simple, right? Because if it's not simple and somebody else can't drive it, then that also means why they've dropped it, because it's just too much hard work. Do you know the simplest system we've got? But our kids line up. I love this. They line up in the playground, agree or disagree with lineups and all that, and the whole Mossbourne thing, but really simple, right? I believe in lineups. In Australia, we lined up in a quadrangle. That's where we had our assemblies in the morning. But Sunshine, it does a thing where you can have 1,000 kids in one out. When I say assembly, we're outside in the playground, right? But imagine this: so the kids line up in the morning. They all take their coats off, and then they lift their planner and their pencil case up. Any child who doesn't have a planner comes to the front to get a planner for the day, and obviously a sanction applies with that as well. And also then the head of the year knows everything's going on. Every child's had their uniform checked. Every child's they've got their equipment checked. Every child's ready to start the day, and he's not going to go into a room and start off with a bad day. They've had the uniform checked on the gate because somebody there doing it. So by the time that child gets into a classroom, all of those things have been done. That's freed the cognitive load on the head of the year, who's not going to deal with something later. It's freed the load on the form tutors, who have everything done already as a group outside. And the student knows they're ready and they're not going to get into trouble for not having something inside. So for 3 people, a simple lifting a planner in the air, simple system, has transformed their day and removed a whole bunch of rubbish at the beginning of the day. That's what I mean by systems.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a recent convert to lineup, so I'm gonna sing the praises here. We go one step further. We actually go down the line and collect everyone's mobile phones in, and then they're locked away for the day, which is we have almost 0 incidents with phones. And do you know what? It just, as a teacher, it's another thing not to worry about. I just want to go back.
Can I be controversial? I'm trying to figure out why they're not leaving the phone at home.
Well, yeah.
Sorry, I had to say it. I couldn't let that one pass. So.
Heaven forbid that they were separated from their phone for that long.
What about the bus journey? Think about the bus journey.
Bus journey, yeah.
Exactly. And I don't buy into it when parents tell me the mobile phone makes them safe. Most of my kids who get robbed for their phone. Literally, it's like you got mugged for your phone, and if you didn't have it on you. Anyway, let's go back to it.
I just want to go back to one of the first things you said, because I'm really interested in this. So a leader needs to know themselves, knows their context, know their theory. I'm reflecting back to, and I think Arthur might have even been in the room at this stage. One of the first jobs I ever had as an assistant head was life after levels.
Oh,
at the time, I've been, I would say, a competent middle leader for a number of years.
I don't know why I laughed.
I knew the system, knew how it was changing. So I knew the context of the school and where they wanted to go. I knew the theory behind why it was changing, how it was going to change it. I did a terrible job. And looking back now, it was horrible. At the time, I was so convinced that I was on that right path. So I'm interested in your schools. How do you support leaders in developing that knowledge of themselves, knowledge of context, knowledge of theory? Because it's something we're always evolving. We look back the first time we ever led and we're like, oh, why did I do that?
God.
That was horrible. And I look back at something a year ago and I think, oh, no, that was horrible. So we're always evolving. But how do you support your leaders in that process?
Yeah. So first of all, like, oh God, if I had a pound for every mistake I'd made, I'd be a very rich man.
Yeah, I wouldn't be teaching.
Yeah, and I think that's it. And I will just say, like, we'll come on to it. Like, I know we're going to plug the book later, but there's some doozies in the book, right? Absolute doozies of mistakes I've made. I mean, absolutely top drawer. Mossbourne doesn't make mistakes. I tell you, there's some great ones in there. And I just think when we just kind of just on mistakes, and I'll come on to how we train the leaders. I think with mistakes, it's really simple. I listened to a Radio 4 interview once, and this guy was a boss for like this big company. There's a Friday boss it used to be. And you know what it was? The guy said, have you made mistakes? He said, I make mistakes all the time. And he said, what's the difference? He said, I correct them quickly. I own up to it. I move on. And he said, and if you ever think about it, right, the people you think don't make mistakes, have a think, have a look. They do make them. The people who are always right make mistakes. Do you know what happens is when they make a mistake, they don't actually fight. They're not wrong and strong. They just like, okay, they move on. And so you just don't remember them making mistakes. I think it's really important. So first thing is like, amongst all this, you're going to make mistakes, right? Which is why I think that's important, like you said. But realize that, you know what, that's okay. Make a mistake, move on, get on with it. So part of that, knowing yourself, knowing the context, knowing theories, you've got to be willing to allow leaders to sort of, I'm trying to say something up, right? Just actually, they've got to be allowed to kind of make that mistake and mess up. As long as it doesn't affect children, you've got to create that space where that's okay and create the space where they feel confident. Now, I always say this. I try in order to sort of encourage this idea. Have you ever thought about, we praise people when something goes well, right? Have you ever thought about praising somebody for just taking an actually acceptable risk, even if it goes wrong? Even when it goes wrong. So I really like the fact that you thought about the risk. I see how you measured it, and I think you did a really good job there. I know it didn't pan out, but I like what you've done. We're praising people for taking the risk, for doing what they analyzed that risk. They understood it. They knew what was in front of them. So life after levels, right? You knew it. You took a risk. You took a view. You thought about it, and you took a decision, right? It could completely fall on its backside. But the first thing is actually stop just praising everything goes right, because what you're training people to do is only do things that come right. They'll just actually become frozen. Recognize mistakes, accept them, and actually thank them for them. Right? That's a huge concept. Now, when you do that, then what you're doing is allowing that kind of idea of failure, right? It's not about not failing. Obviously, we're dealing with children, so we need to be a bit more careful. And it's not just somebody else's money, right? We're not a banker. We've got children's lives. So it's actually important stuff. And we need to think about that. So when I talk about knowing themselves, the first one is like actually having honest conversations with people, right? That's where it starts. I think it's, I can't remember who wrote a book called Radical Candor. I think knowing yourself is always about having an honest and direct conversation first. So our culture is, if things are going well, I'll tell you. And if things aren't going well, I'll tell you. And I'll tell you how to get there. Right? So the first thing is just being really clear. Right? And that might seem weird about someone getting to know themselves, but actually having a conversation. So one of my head teachers the other day wrote this email, and it was rude as hell. And I just said, let's get your email out. Have a look at that. And she read it. She went, I said, so you don't think that's rude? And she looked at it and went, a bit sheepish. And she said, yes. But I was reflecting to her what other people were seeing of her. So she's now knows something about herself. So you don't know it straight away. It's going on that journey, being able to have those radical conversations, being able to be really candid with people, but creating a culture where that's okay. But to do that, you've got to be willing to have it said back to you. So my leaders will say to me, I stood up and do speeches for Year 7 parents evening. I come off the stage and they're like, yeah, that one wasn't very good today. You didn't do this, or this, or they say, oh, that one was good. And I'm like, I've just got off the stage. The first thing you do is actually telling me how I could do it better. I could do with you just telling me it's great right now, because I'm really down, but it's that directness, right? And so that's what I mean by knowing yourself. Other people can shine a light on you. You've got to be willing to shine a light on each other, but you've got to be willing to do it on yourself first. So that's what I mean by know yourself. That's how I would come about how we change it. In terms of context, again, it's the same thing. Conversations about it. When somebody's going to put something in place in my school, it's discussed by everybody. People don't stay in their lane, right? I tell people not to stay in their lane. I tell them to bring it forward, put it on the table, let everybody pick it apart. And when everybody's picked it apart, then you can take away and take that information and then go and think about it. So you start from that to know that helps you understand what you did, helps you understand your context, and then you can start to think about how that applies to the theory. So it's a lot of what I'd call on the job. And I also recommend books and articles and stuff like that they would read to help out with the theory side. But the other two are about on-the-job training. It's about that constant training and constant feedback in your one-to-ones, etc. around leaders. Around teachers, if I sort of apply this same thing one layer down, because I remember what you said, like it was useful for teachers. For them, we're deliberate, right? We've got training every Thursday. Every Thursday afternoon, we finish early, we do training. We have a training on a Monday and a Wednesday, where we're constantly just going back through the things we want, right? So it's some of it's really simple stuff. We talk about mobile phones. Every Wednesday morning, there'll be a pastoral thing on the board. It'll be a scenario, and you just say to the teacher's coming in, how would you deal with that scenario? Talk to the person beside you while we're waiting. Talk to your partner when you finish talking to your partner. But it's all about your modeling, right? You're modeling all the time. And then what we do is we say, right, okay, how would you deal with that? Normally somebody speaks up, and it's a beauty when some senior leader speaks up about how to solve it, and they're wrong. They're just like wrong. And some like head of you goes, no, now that's not what we're going to do. We're going to do this. And they put the perfect answer. But that's a kind of, so when I say this, know yourself, know your context, that's what we're talking about, like that constant drip feed. There's no other secret to it. You've got to drip feed it. You've got to live and walk the walk.
You've got to have that, I guess, that culture of psychological safety as well, where senior leaders not afraid to speak out and get it wrong. That's really important. Arthur, you had a point you wanted to come in on there.
I was going to come off that point you just made, Mike, of like, I think when you're within this culture and you get it, like that's a really powerful thing. I think I've been part of teams that has kind of had that culture. And what I'm interested, kind of looping that back to, you talk about the right people. If you're bringing people into that culture, imagine that could be coming from certain schools. It can be maybe a different kind of cultural experience to be in a room where kind of that's going on. I'm interested how do you select the right people and then think about how they can adapt to the culture of your schools, or do you look for someone who can fit to the culture and then kind of the rest comes from that?
Okay, so I'm gonna say it's a bit 50-50 on that. So when I'm thinking about selecting people, I've got a list for leaders, but let's do it on teachers to keep it really simple, right? So when you're selecting people, select them for things you can't train, you can't teach them. So don't think culture. What are the things that they can't? What is it that you can't teach them, right? So I can't teach a teacher or any person to be a hard worker. I can't teach them to be hungry and want to work hard, right? I can inspire them to do so, but if it's not kind of their natural kind of, they're not somebody who wants to just be, they're not got that like a little burning flame inside them, then I can't teach you that. I can inspire you, I can help you think, but that only goes so far. So I'm looking for somebody who has that sort of, they want to learn, right? They have a desire to learn. That's really important to me. So I can't teach you that. I can't teach you to care about our mission, right? Creating environments where learning is the norm. Right? You need to believe and buy into our mission. That's not every element of our culture, because the culture is the conversations, but do you buy into what we're doing? Do you believe in what we're doing and the way we're doing it? Because that's fundamental, right? I can kind of sell you a little bit on it, but I need you to believe in what we're doing. If you thoroughly believe that everything should be project learning, and I'm saying, no, we do direct instruction, like where are we going to go from that, right? So that's a fundamental difference, which is probably not going to be resolved anytime soon. And I could give you a litany of them. And do you know the last one? I can't remember. I call it so like, you need to like, it's somebody, I can't make you bright. And I can't make you sort of intellectually curious. And I don't mean, when I say bright, I don't mean going off to Oxford or Cambridge bright. I mean, you know what? Somebody who's just desperate to learn, somebody who's actually got that hunger, has that good subject knowledge, and has the ability to pick things up. And when even if they're not quite getting it, they'll go again because they've got that hunger on the other side, and they're a work ethic. So when you start putting those three things together, I can teach you everything. I can teach you nearly everything else, right? But those three things I don't think can be taught. And so for me, we're going to come back to those three simple ideas, which are, is this person, are they intellectually curious, right? Are they hardworking? And do they believe in what we do? Everything else can be taught. Now, obviously, I'd like to get the other things as well, but let's keep it there as the three things I can teach.
And can I follow up from that? Because I think what you're saying is really interesting. Select people on what you can't train.
Yep.
So how do you, as a leader, whether it's bringing someone within your school system or outside, an external hire, how do you see whether they work hard? Because obviously in an interview, I'm going to say, I work hard. So I'm just interested kind of from that
Yeah,
perspective.
of course. Yeah, yeah. Sorry, I get terrible habit of interrupting, but yeah. So everyone says I work hard, right? So have you ever asked somebody in an interview? So I do. I ask this question all the time, right? And this will give you a lot, tell you a lot about somebody. So, tell me something. If I said to you, right, tell me a time when you failed. And I then say to them, do not turn this into a positive because I'll stop you and ask you the question again. And I do stop them and I will ask the question again. I think the record is 5 times I asked somebody and then I said, clearly you're not going to answer, and I stopped. Right? And there's stories of people who work with me as principals, and they're like, I recall our interview, you just kept stopping me. I'm like, yeah, because I asked you a question, I gave you a clear outline. And so what that tells you when somebody tells you that is you understand how they respond to failure. And that is a lot about hard work, right? That's about resilience. That's about that willing to drive forward, willing to learn from that. So it tells you a lot about, and it tells you about the level of honesty, willing to be openness and willing to be a bit fragile in a really stressful scenario. And I even tell them, the more you tell me how bad it went and how you resolve from that, the better this question will go for you. Like, that's what I'm looking for. The number of people who go, oh, I overwork and I stay at school too late and I've got to get better at my work-life balance. I'm like, what a load of codswallop, right? Absolutely not. When I hear somebody say, like, I remember I did an interview for my principal and they said, so Peter, what's the thing you need to do? I said, well, I'm not really good at people, right? I don't do people. I'm a mathematician. I'm probably a bit down on the spectrum. I really don't understand why people have all of these emotional needs sometimes. I said, I really struggle with it. And they said, oh, okay, that's fairly honest. I did actually say this in my principal interview. I told somebody I don't really do people, which might seem strange. I'm doing a podcast, right? But this is no emotion involved, right? If you get down to the emotion, I'm like, no, I don't want to talk about emotions. Let's park them over there somewhere, right? Somebody else can do that for you, not me. But they said, okay, what are you going to do? I said, well, I've got a great deputy. I know I'm not very good at this, but she's amazing at it. And people know I will make sure everything works for you, but you can go and cry on her shoulder, not mine. And that's fine, right? And it's just owning that up. I'm not saying I don't work on that and I try and sort of be empathy and do that for people. It's important. And in 15 years I've grown a lot, but that's what I'm talking about. Just actually, yeah.
And I've got a question for Mike. Mike, can we please talk about systems and policies and procedures? Because you know how I feel about system policies and procedures.
Yeah, we like that. I like people, and I think you really like policy and systems. So,
well, yeah, I'm a mathematician, so I empathise with you a lot.
I just don't like this scenario where I'm Arthur's deputy. It doesn't sit well with me, Arthur.
Now that's an interesting conversation, Mike. Am I your deputy or you my deputy? Wow. Oh, that's a different podcast. It's a great podcast. Note to self. So like if we've spoke about kind of the right people, we spoke about knowing yourself, fearing context, and you briefly kind of spoke about like putting these systems in place. Can you give us an example of one of the systems you have within your school that kind of, if we link it back to what you were talking about, allowing kind of people to take risks? I was wondering, like, how do you, rather than just sitting down with someone saying, take a risk or take what you think is a good risk, how do you support them within kind of the school structure and systems?
Yeah, so here's a good example, right? So we do, I created a system and I run a sort of software company on the side when I'm not writing my book or running my trust. And so we have what's called drop-in observation. So we have a constant litany of people receiving feedback, right, on a cycle. I won't go too much into it, but the idea of the cycle is that anybody can go in and observe and they can see what people are working on. They can see what they're good at. They can see what they're good at, what they work on. They can see what other people have said. They can see what they're doing for their career aspirations, right? So anybody who's going in to give you feedback has got all of that information in front of them. And then also they've got information about where the class is. And you might be thinking, okay, so what's that got to do with taking a risk? So the way we've set the system up is, because we're not looking at people as one single piece of information. Say you, I would say, right, say you go in and I give you some feedback today, and today was a crap lesson, right? It was a bad one. That's fine. Today was developing. That's all right. That's cool. And tomorrow might be highly effective, and the other day might be effective. So the idea is we're not interested in whether you have one good lesson or one good lesson or one bad lesson. We're looking at what you call that typicality over time, right? The wisdom of the crowd. So We want to know kind of on average, where are you? What is it you're trying to do? And how are you developing? So we want you to take a risk. And if you have a bad lesson, that's cool. It'll show up on the system as one-off or one bits and pieces. That's okay. So what we're doing is saying to people, it's okay. And we're not going to somehow magically, like the world's going to crash on you because there's one piece of bad information about somewhere. It's about that, how you deal with that conversation. Oh, that was great. You tried that today. Right. Shall we come back tomorrow? Maybe you want to try it again. I'll have another look and see how it's going and give you feedback. So it's about saying, if that is just that one-off risk and whatever else you took, what did you learn from it? And did you move forward? So I think you can do that through the way you give teachers feedback. And we need to get away from this idea of like, it's all about like pound. It's this gradual, constant feedback, like that, like Dad Gilmour, like tacit accountability or something like that. So it's that idea of that little and often people move forward. Do you know what the strange thing is? We know it works for kids. That's a bad piece of work. Oh God, here, give you some feedback. And then how are you going to do it tomorrow? And I'm going to give you some more feedback the next day and the next day. And we do that with kids. We do it when we play sport or we're coaching sport. And then we get teachers and we somehow think we're going to do something different to move them forward. Like, let's just be clear. Let's actually make it okay. And I think the best one, so the best one's not me. I just thought about this. So I got a new, well, I'd say new, she's about 4 years into being a head teacher at my primary school. And they were sort of looking at this and how they're going to sort of bring this in, and we change the way we're sort of giving people feedback. And so all the senior leaders have opened up their sort of pro forma one by one in front of the whole school when they were observed giving a bad lesson, and shared their feedback with everybody, all the staff, to say, look, I had bad days and here's a bad day I had. And you can see somebody else watch me do it. And they gave me a comment that I was not having a good day. That's okay. I'm not a bad person. I'm not a bad teacher. I have good and bad days. And they literally did that in front of the staff. And I thought that, I've never done that, but that was brave, right? That's real bravery. And that's kind of real modeling of what you're expecting the staff to do. So model it, walk it.
Yeah. And this links into what you were talking about with correcting mistakes, like quickly. I think we spoke about teachers, but even as a leader, quite often we see someone maybe give a presentation to a whole school, and it's Mike Howell delivering a assessment with without levels presentation. I was in the room, so I can say that. And what's really nice sometimes, I've been in schools where that person's email the next day being like, do you know what? I've reflected. I didn't communicate this well. So here's me again summarizing my points.
Yeah.
I think that's like, it doesn't just have to be in the classroom, but it's all about that ability to reflect upon what you're doing and be open and honest. And that's like, it's hard to be open and honest, but you have to build those relationships with people like we build relationships with our students.
But that goes all the way, right? So open and honest. If that person's doing a great job, be open and honest about them. We're looking at you, maybe a promotion, maybe there's something coming through. Maybe it's time to go to another school because we haven't got a place for you. Like, just be free about that. That's okay. But also on the other side, if it's not working out, why not be open and honest, right? I'm going to tell you it's not working out. That's okay. And teaching, we sort of think everybody's going to stay in the one place all the time and everything's going to happen. No, I ask myself every year if I'm still the right person to run my organization or I should move on, right? And we all need to be like, that's what open and honest needs to cover all spectrums of it, and just be really clear that the world moves, and we just got to kind of be willing to kind of move on that path. And I talk about, a friend of mine talks about New Zealand's have it. He's a Maori, and he talks about something called mana. And he does one of my case studies in the book. And he talks about mana. And what he says is, mana is like, it's a bit like pride. It's not quite pride. I'm going to do a disservice to try and explain a Maori piece of culture, but I'm just going to say pride for a shortcut here, and hope they'll all forgive me for bumbling over it. But the idea is, it's about somebody shouldn't leave without their mana intact, without your pride intact. No matter what the conversation, no matter what's going on, whether you're a child, adult, or a kid, or whatever's going on, don't let someone leave your office if you've taken their pride away. Like, you can have a really honest conversation. You can be really direct. You can have very, very difficult conversations. You don't have to steal someone's pride. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, we spoke about this in the previous podcast, didn't we, Mike, when we were talking about those one-to-one meetings, when we spoke to Stephen Rogenberg, of just like always end on that positive. Mike, you had a point earlier that you wanted to jump in on.
Yeah, well, it was an observation and a question. I just love what you were saying there about lessons. And it really made me think, when we assess students, we have to make that differentiation, don't we? Am I assessing their performance right now, or am I assessing their learning? And there's been a long time in in education, we went through this phase of measuring a teacher's performance in that given time where they put on a show. But actually, what we're doing is we want to be tracking the teachers' learning and their progress as a professional. And I love that idea.
Oh God, don't get me started on that. I can talk till the cows come home about how many times I used to practice my performance management observations on another class, get somebody to come watch me, give me feedback, so I deliver it properly, so I get the pay rise, right? Like literally, like who would not practice something if you were going to have that much put on the line? But yeah,
everyone's had a go-to observation.
I'm old enough to know when you used to get 3 days of warning before Ofsted come in, and then you would all be practicing your lessons. Ready for the Ofsted
you did this yesterday, sir. No,
no, you didn't. I'm interested. What we try and do towards the end of the pod, Peter, is we try and wrap up with a question about if I'm listening to Peter Hughes now on this podcast, and tomorrow I want to go and do one thing that's going to make me a better leader in my school. What can I do? So what would you give a listener as a piece of advice to take away from this if they go and do one thing tomorrow?
I'm going to sort of be a bit cheeky and do sort of one thing internally and one thing sort of externally. So what I would say is the thing you can do right now, without even going to school, is just really ask yourself why you're doing it. Just that really simple question. Do you know why? And actually try and find your why. Like, why are you getting up tomorrow morning? Because we're in a profession that if you don't know that, the kids can smell it, like fear. Kids can smell fear. And everyone can smell it, right? I think the second thing I would say is that tomorrow, if the next time you're in a room and we're all being there, right? Everyone's talking about that teacher or that person, about they're doing that. And you will be nodding. I can see you know, like we've been there. Just say, who's spoken to them? Who's told that person and who's told them how they can get better? Literally, every time somebody starts talking about somebody, stop the conversation, say, have you spoken to the person yet? And don't engage in the conversation. That will create a culture of high challenge. And actually, the teacher on the other side of that may just not know that they're not delivering. And you're giving them every chance to be successful then. So 2 things. Ask yourself why you get up in the morning. I said one, but sorry. And on the second part is, the next time somebody starts talking about somebody, say, and who's telling the person?
I think that's a really, really interesting one. I think I'm definitely going away and think about it. I think that's something for us all to kind of think about. I think you can take that out of school. You can put that into kind of society, can't you? But that's a different podcast here. So Peter, we mentioned you've written a book. You mentioned some stuff you do. Someone's listening to this pod. They're like, yep, I want to know more about Peter Hughes. I want to know more about this book. Where do they go? What do they do?
So right now it's on Bloomsbury. And so if you order before the 6th, you can sort of go onto the Bloomsbury website, look for Peter Hughes. It'll be on there. If you use Hughes 35 without the S, you will actually get a discount of 30% if you order before the 6th of December, because it comes out on the 7th. And then if you really want to know about sort of Progress Teaching, which is the software platform I developed in order to improve the quality of teaching and learning in schools, so it's improve student outcomes by improving teaching. Like if you don't improve teaching, you can't improve student outcomes, right? So if you're really interested in that and how you kind of have all of those pieces around assessment, parental communication, teaching and learning in a single platform, then go and look up Progress Teaching, all one word, .com, and you'll see something there, and reach out to us, and we'd love to come and show you what we do.
Perfect. And what is there a good way that people can connect and follow you? Are you a
LinkedIn,
Twitter kind
LinkedIn's the best way. If you follow me on LinkedIn, I'm on LinkedIn. If you want to reach out and say hi to me, that's fine. Happy to answer any questions people have got, really. I may take a little bit of time to get back to you. I'm quite busy, but I will answer you and I will respond to you. So just reach out, connect, say hi, and I'll be happy to answer anything you've got. Really, LinkedIn's the best way. I'm trying to get better at Twitter and social media. Somebody told me to sell a book. I've got to really do that, but I'm old school. I'm still trying to figure out what WhatsApp is. So, I'm the person who was like, I'm not going to have a mobile phone, and remembers the joy of buying the 3210. So anyone out there who knows what the 3210 is, then actually, and you play Snake, you're in about my age group.
The 3210 is the greatest phone ever made. I would still have one if I could. Peter, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on TandTeaching. Lots of really interesting points, and lots of things for me and Mike to go away and think about. So massively appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on the pod.
It's been a real pleasure, and thank you very much, guys. And I hopefully talk to you soon. Bye.
Listeners, we'll be back in a moment. Welcome back to TandTeaching. Mike Harrowell, we've just spoken to Peter Hughes, and I've got so many notes on my pad. How did you find that conversation first?
So much to take in. Like he's so knowledgeable about what he's doing. He's so experienced with how he's doing it. And you can see in terms of writing that book, he's been able to then structure all of his thoughts and get it down onto paper, which was really, really powerful for that conversation.
Was there anything that stood out for you as kind of that the main thing you're going to take away from that conversation?
Yeah, I love the fact that he was like, praise someone for taking a risk. So say well done for giving that a go, because we often call people out for making a mistake, but how often do we call them in for making a mistake? And I love that idea of it.
It's like when you're talking to a student and you're like, well done for giving the question a go. You got it wrong, let's talk about that now, but you gave it a go, and that you can't get something wrong if you didn't give it a go in the first place.
Absolutely.
For me, it was when he was talking about, like, kind of linked to what you're saying. If you make a mistake, let's correct those mistakes quickly. And I think that's really true if you're in the classroom. I know sometimes like we have a plan and we're like, oh, I'll stick to plan, but if something's not working, go back and correct it. And I think that's true. Like you could do that the next way, but I think it's also true as a leader. If you've done something that hasn't worked, you haven't communicated something well, you've introduced something that clearly hasn't taken, take a step back, reflect, and then go and fix it. Don't just hope it's going to fix itself, or worse, just hope people will forget and then nothing gets done and nothing improves. So I thought that was that's something I'm really going to think about kind of when I'm working with students. Like if we make a mistake, how can we go back and correct that quickly? And how am I going to support that?
Yeah, I think we've just selected 2 takeaways there, but I think we could have selected multiple takeaways each from that. And like you, I've got so many notes to reflect upon that great chat with Peter. And
I would challenge everyone to go away and think about, do you know yourself and the context in which you're working in? I think they're brilliant questions to ask yourself on the commute in the morning, just before you walk in the building. Why are you doing this? And what is the context in which you're working on? So thank you so much for Peter giving up his time for us. Thank you, Mike Harrowell, for being such a fantastic co-host. But mainly, thank you to the listeners for giving us your time. We'll speak to you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of TandTeaching.
If you've enjoyed the content of this episode, please feel free to share it with other educators.
And if you're able to, please leave a review on the platform.
And as always, thank you for listening to TandTeaching.